So I went down to the manuscript division of the Library of Congress, and I asked to see Justice Frankfurter's papers. And they said, well, he's just published a book. Would you like to see the book? I said, no, I'd like to see the papers on which the book is based. So getting into Frankfurter's papers, I found mention of Masonry several times, and I found that other justices were Masons. And I said, maybe that has something to do with it. So I checked the record of the justices of the Supreme Court to see whether it was common for members to be Masons. And I found that for the first time in history, beginning in 1941 and extending through the period of 1971, 30 years, the court was dominated by Freemasons. And so I said, maybe that's it.
You think that was by design or by accident?
Well, you know, there was the stories back in the 30s about Franklin Roosevelt wanting to pack the court.
Right.
And some people say today, as have columnists, Leslie Gelb said it several months ago, that the court was never packed until the Republicans came in, and particularly Reagan and now Bush trying to pack the court. Well, the so-called packing the court is really the battle for the soul of the American people, because the court decides what our moral standards will be. So going through those papers and finding that they're Masons and that they dominated the court for a long time, I said, well, so that. They dominated. What's Masonry? I didn't know about Masonry. I only knew that the Catholic Church opposed Masonry, largely because of its secret oaths, and you swear to uphold obligations which you don't know what those obligations are. They'll be revealed to you later. So I was reminded that when I first went up on Capitol Hill, the fun guys of Freemasonry, the Shriners, had a parade. And I was sitting there, we had 4 children at the time, and I said, gee, I don't care what the church says. These men are bringing a lot of happiness to all these kids, my kids, and all the people here. The place was packed, you know,
they do a lot of charitable work, too, for the hospitals.
And their charity work for the hospitals. Right. And so that was my knowledge of Masonry. And I knew vaguely that they had a young group called De Molay for teenagers and so forth. So I said, well, I better find out what Masonry is if these men dominate the court. So I tried to find the document that the Masons keep in touch with the Brotherhood. And I found in Scottish Rite Masonry, and I picked Scottish Rite because most of the members of the court who were Masons were members of the Scottish Rite fraternity. And I found that book to be the New Age magazine. It's a monthly publication that goes back to the turn of the century. And I read it. It's about 100 pages long. It was up until post-World War II. I read every monthly magazine, 100 pages or more each month, page by page, because I'd been in the intelligence community, and I knew that most real intelligence comes from just gathering a lot of facts that are in the public domain and then putting together. And they call it the intelligence mosaic. And you can find out what the picture is when you get all these facts and arrange them properly. Yes. So I found that these men have been behind revolutions, from the French Revolution. I find that they boast about it. I find that in the New Age magazine they boast about being the successors to the ancient mysteries, the pagan ancient mysteries, which got into all sorts of obscenities and was completely pagan in its outlook. And I found that, that the Freemasonry in the United States is not much different than it had been in Europe. And the other book, which came later, Their God is the Devil, is really a listing of papal encyclicals which have condemned Masonry from 1738 virtually into the present day.
I thought not too long ago the Pope said he could join the Mason, the Catholic could join the Mason.
Well, that's a misperception, but it's partly the Church's fault for doing that. For years, the 1913 Code of Canon Law explicitly mentioned Freemasonry, that you cannot be a member of the Masonic fraternity or you'll be excommunicated. And in the Catholic Church, excommunication is a terrible sin which separates you from God, and it used to separate you from fellow Catholics, but they modified that social ostracization. And it was a sin that only the Pope himself could forgive. It's called a reserve sin. That was later turned down to the Vatican, and then later in 1962, I think, Paul VI allowed bishops ordinaries to do it, and then that went to the confessor. So that attenuated it sometime. But the new law in 1983 expunged any reference to Masonry and any reference to overthrowing civil government. And so people became confused, and indeed a number of bishops have spoken before Masonic groups. Cardinal of New York, Cardinal Cook, appeared before something like 2,500 Freemasons sometime in the 70s, the date exactly escapes me, at a breakfast, and he apologized to the fraternity for his fellow clergymen who had condemned Masonry over the years, and he wanted to make up for that. And of course those clergymen happened to be about 12 or 15 popes. And there's a total in this book here, Their God is the Devil, there's a total of something like 55 condemnations in Vatican documents, whether it is encyclicals or letters and so forth, with where Masonry is condemned either explicitly or implicitly, and explicitly 18 times.
Right. Well,
So that in when this change came, that change in canon law, everybody thought they could belong, and with Cardinal Cook and a number of other bishops and cardinals speaking at Masonic gatherings,
gave that impression. Huh?
gave that impression, and a lot of men have gone.
Well, Paul, I think we have to take a break now for a short message.
Fine.